Episode 7 of the Necronama.com is brought to you in memory of my friend and former classmate, Preston Carnes. I met Preston in 1993 when we were at Pius X High School in Lincoln, Nebraska together. He was my lab partner in science class. He told me one day how he'd been born with his heart in backwards and required multiple surgeries in his young lifetime. We bonded over the weird stuff we found funny that not many others did. At graduation, I insisted he was in group photos with my other friends, who thought it was kind of weird because they'd never spent much time with Preston, but they had no way of knowing how many times Preston listened to me talk about problems that I didn't trust anyone else with. He was so wise beyond his years, even in high school. He never really struck me as another kid trying to get through, even though he was. No, back then I thought he was just the kind of man who understood everything. Maybe that's a side effect of always knowing that the Reaper is riding with you, even when everyone else around your age still believes they are invincible. Whatever it was, Preston helped me a lot, and I wanted him to know how much I valued that. We lost touch over the years and reconnected a couple different times on Facebook. I finally got to talk to him a few months ago and reconnect with him. In the time in between, he traveled the world, he served as a volunteer firefighter in his Shelby County, Indiana community. He loved pyrotechnics, using his expertise to set up fireworks shows for the communities. He'd had 5 open-heart surgeries during his life and 7 different pacemakers. This kid who wasn't supposed to make it a few days finally got on the heart transplant list 43 years later. He found out he was going to be a father this past August. I was sitting at a little bar in Salt Lake City with Edward Savio, Vincent Cava, Don, and a couple other amazing new friends when I got the news. Thursday, September 5th, Preston complained of a headache. He collapsed a few minutes later. Even with a helicopter ride to the hospital, it was too late. He'd suffered a large brain hemorrhage. The one thing I know without a doubt is that Preston would have laughed his butt off to hear that it wasn't his heart that killed him. Preston was such an amazing person. No matter how much pain he was in, his main concern was always how he could help anyone else. He waited so long for a heart transplant that never came. His final gift to others was ensuring that someone on some other list didn't have to keep waiting like he'd done the majority of his life. Preston was able to donate several organs to help other people. In his memory, I would love all of you to do the same. Please visit organdonor.gov today to sign up to donate your organs if you haven't already. As Preston would say, if you're not using them, someone else should be. I'm incredibly pleased knowing that even in death, Preston continued being the person he had always been. I really hope to see him again on the other side so that I can do whatever is the equivalent of shaking hands with someone and telling you how much you respect them. Rest in peace, my friend. I'm James Sabata, author, screenwriter, co-host of this podcast.
And I'm Don Guillory, author, historian, and co-host of the podcast as well that you're listening to.
And today we're going to talk about one of my all-time favorite coming-of-age tales, Stand By Me. But first, I thought, since I keep skipping this when I've meant to do it for episodes and episodes now, I thought we should talk about all these conventions we've been going to.
Oh, yeah. You've been going to a lot more than I have, but the most recent one this past weekend was Salt Lake FanX, and it was outstanding. I
most recent for you, I went to another one.
Well, yeah, you were at Fargo, I think, this past week. But Salt Lake FanX was outstanding. I'm already looking forward to going next year, whether we're invited or not. I'm just going to go ahead and plan it out, get the tickets, and go.
That's actually how a lot of your life works. Whether you're invited or not, you just show up, kick in the door.
That's what I'm supposed to, man.
There you go.
If you act like you belong, there are no problems.
Sure. Let's go with that. So, I started at New Mexico Comic Expo in August, And that was a really cool show. One of the highlights of that was Jason Momoa was on a skateboard going through Exhibition Hall. So that was very strange. There's video on YouTube if you want to check it out. It's pretty sweet. The big thing with New Mexico Comic Expo was there was almost no other horror programming there. So I wasn't really expecting a huge turnout to my panels. And there was still a ton of people who were really into horror. They were asking me why there was no other horror programming, like I'm somehow in control of that, which I'm not. Right after that, I went to Prescott, Arizona, and I was at Gateway to Geekdom. I did a panel there with BS Movies' Brian Haas, who was on our Terminator episode, and his co-host Shelley Grant. We did humor and horror there, and that had a pretty good turnout as well. Then there was FanX, which was one of the most amazing shows I've ever been to. You and I had a blast there. We're going to come back to that in just a second because I just want to throw out. And then this past weekend, I was at Anime Fargo in Fargo, North Dakota. And that one was a pure anime convention. I still had a packed room, standing room only. And they were so into horror. It was amazing. And that's kind of what I want to talk about with you, Don. I mean, you probably noticed this as well, but it really hit me how hungry people are to talk about horror films.
Well, here's the thing. One, a lot of people show up. I think one of our problems at a previous convention at the Phoenix Fan Fusion was there was a lot of scheduling of horror panels almost at the same time, 2 or 3 at the same time. And so the horror fans, expressed, at least to us, that they wish that the horror panels had been spread out because they wanted to go to all of them. There were so many things to talk about, from one of the ones we were on, bold statements, to readings of horror films, the crossovers. But even at FanX, because I thought that was something that might have just been with Phoenix, but then of course from you going to some of the other panels, you experienced that. And then when we got together again at Salt Lake FanX, I mean, it was just, people were waiting outside the door probably about 30 minutes before the panel even started because they wanted to go see the horror ones. They wanted to talk about it. They want to talk about, their favorite horror films or some weird theories that they might have had, or, just hear us riff about some of the movies. And maybe it's an issue or just an aspect of kind of feeling like that. No offense to redheaded stepchildren. I was a ginger up until I was about the age of 2. But the idea that horror has basically become the redheaded stepchild of all the genres and stuff, which makes no sense since furries exist. But shout out to furries, and shout out to standing up to Milo Yiannopoulos. So you got points in my book for that one. But just the idea that horror fans, they want to talk about their genre. We want to sit around and laugh. We want to talk about the stuff that was shocking to us. And it doesn't seem, other than a lot of the horror cons themselves, there doesn't seem to be that much of I guess too many opportunities for fans of the genre within some of the mainstream conventions to participate in it, unless it's something that has become mainstream, like The Walking Dead, or certain types of horror fandoms. Even if they don't realize.
Doctor Who.
Well, yeah.
Doctor Who's always huge with that.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things, unless you're part of that fandom, you're not really going to those things, and you might not branch out beyond that. But, the average run-of-the-mill, everyday horror fan, they want to talk about the classics. They want to talk about the slashics. They want to talk about the new stuff that's coming out, the monster movies.
Can we trademark that?
No.
Slashix is a great
Shudder
name. Is that already taken?
When I saw it on Shudder, I was like, that is great.
They're so smart.
The Slashix. But, in fact, at least right now, the plan for my dissertation is to talk about the impact of history and social events on horror films, and vice versa. Because from sitting with people, from going to the panels, from speaking on the panels, talking to people after the panels at the different conventions, and even through email and social media, people want to talk about horror, and they're realizing, there's a lot more horror in film and television, music, than they realize.
I've been really impressed with the questions that they're asking at the panels. We are getting some of the most intelligent panel questions I've witnessed at panels, and I've been going to these for 10 years or so now. And I'm blown away by it. And even more so at the younger generation bringing some of these amazing questions. We had quite a few, 14 to 16-year-olds that are just hitting us with these academically heavy, amazing questions about horror films.
Yeah, I had to. I was taken aback a couple of times where I thought I must have been at a history conference or an academic conference because at least with some of the questions that were being asked, and they were typically from the younger crowd, yeah, it made you question, or actually, it didn't make you question anything. It made you content with at least the future fans of horror, at least wanting to have more depth within the films, want to have more depth within their conversations surrounding the films. So hopefully, at least one day, there'll be a convention on the level of FanX or Fan Fusion or Comic Con or anything like that, where it's just horror and it gets out, we at least get out of people's minds this idea that horror movies are these really simplistic things that are done with bad acting, bad writing, bad production, always predictable as far as who's going to live, who's going to die, and who the killer is, because they're hungry for highbrow horror as well as the slashics.
Man, I wish we could trademark that name. But the other thing, I find it interesting. We had a girl at FanX who asked a really good question in the panel. I don't remember what it was offhand, but I remember being very impressed with her. Then she met us in the hall, and she was talking about how Catch-22 was being banned at her school. She launched into this way smarter than me defense of why that shouldn't happen, and then asked me, "What's your opinion on that?" And I was like, holy shit, I don't know, because I can't compete with you. And I was so blown away by that. And that reiterated to me how much real life horror they're also facing, which kind of opened me up to thinking about school shootings and all that kind of stuff. And I don't want to really get into that in this episode, but I'm just saying these kids are living with such absolute shit in their lives. And so I think that they're kind of leaning into horror the same way I do to kind of make sense of your pain and make sense of the crazy fucking shit happening in the world. My point with all of this is whenever I'm asked at a con, do you think the horror bubble is going to burst anytime soon? And I've been asked that at all 4 cons I've recently been at. No, I don't, because the next generation is embracing horror so hard that I think we're going to be going amazing places after this. But hey, we should probably get into the movie. Stand By Me is one of the best coming-of-age films I've ever seen. The story is about 4 teenage boys who set out to find a dead body that one of them overheard their older brother talking about, and they hope that if they find this body, they'll become famous. The film is mostly about the adventure of the journey, but more importantly, it shows how young boys cope with the difficulties of growing up in a small town with very little hope for a successful future. The horror comes not from demons or ghosts or other supernatural issues, but from real life and its ability to defeat you at every single turn if you're not willing to keep pushing through. Now, you might be saying that Stand By Me isn't exactly horror, and you wouldn't be wrong. But if you've ever had leeches in your tighty-whities, or experienced a complete and total barf-o-rama, or just had friends pass away before their time, or experienced other major life changes, then you'll know that horror can be anywhere, and fear is the number one emotion coursing through this film. This may not be considered horror, but I consider this Stephen King at his best. So Don, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
If we're talking about, the next generation that's coming up, one thing we can talk about definitely is the previous generation and previous generations from that, as far as what horror really was, growing up. As an adolescent, as a teenager, especially, both of you and I at one point were teenage boys. So there are all types of things that come along with that, as far as, that point where you're going from childhood to manhood, the idea of trying to fit in, figure out where you actually fit in, not just within your friends and peer groups, but also within the world. Because that's a very crazy time, not just the hormones, but it's a crazy time to think about. At one point, this is going to end, as far as this age of innocence, this period obliviousness to the outside world, and you're going to eventually have to engage with the outside world, and it's going to be different for different people, as far as how you get there, and you also have to face off with, the issues that you're dealing with at that moment, being a teenager, from anything from as simple as, oh shit, I got a test on Monday I didn't study for, to, oh my God, this girl likes me, I like her, what do I do? To more serious stuff like what we see in Stand By Me, or even some of the serious stuff that kids are having to deal with today.
I really noticed while I was rewatching it today.
Mm-hmm.
Gordy doesn't feel safe with his own family. He doesn't feel like he fits there. He doesn't fit in at school. I mean, he's academically smart and all of that kind of stuff, but you can tell he's not one of the super popular kids. He's got these bullies that are constantly trying to beat him up or cause him problems or steal his dead brother's hat or whatever else. He's got all this shit going on, and the only place that he feels truly safe is with these other three kids. And that really hit me hard, because I think I would have really identified with that at 13 or 14. Not that I was thinking in those terms at that point, but I really started paying attention to that here, and I think that I'm going to be coming back to that a lot.
I could understand people making that argument that this is not horror, because it's not the horror that they've been told horror should look like. They've been told that horror should be, oh, it's this creepy clown hanging out in the sewers, or it's this guy with, a hockey mask and a machete, or somebody who comes and gets you in your dreams. But yeah, with respect to this film, people look at it and say things like, oh, it's not really horror. It's a coming of age tale about young boys and friendship. Yeah, all that's true. But you also have to factor in what's going on. And as you mentioned, Gordy does not feel safe at home. And I would even venture so far as to, say he doesn't feel accepted at home, not just safe. He doesn't feel accepted. And, it has all to do with his older brother. And at least with his older brother dying, you get this understanding that his brother was kind of that thing that made him feel safe, feel accepted. And once he loses his brother dies, you have this point where, the family becomes even more distant. And it might be an issue of the family is just distant because of their grief over losing the son, and not necessarily they don't like Gordy. And when you're a kid, you don't know how to process feelings. You don't know how to process somebody else's emotions. And I think what this time period was, the 60s? So
50s.
Okay. Even then, people weren't talking openly about their emotions, and especially for men. You weren't talking about, hey, I'm really upset that my son died. I hope, that you don't take any of this stuff personally. When what people were saying was, hey, men don't cry. If your feelings get hurt, suck it up and keep moving, as opposed to somebody talking about their pain. And Gordy, at least from what I remember about the film, or my understanding of the film, is he can't process those feelings. So he internalizes all this to, the parents' grief. It's his fault. The same thing that people would say or feel when their parents would get divorced. Oh, it's my fault that mom and dad don't love each other. So you don't feel safe in that environment anymore. Gordy doesn't feel safe because his brother's dead, his family's distant. He feels like he's responsible, and that, his parents probably wish that he was dead instead of his brother.
He actually has that dream where he's at the funeral and his dad's like, it should have been you, But his dad literally says to him, yeah, absolutely. But his dad literally says to him early in the film when he goes into his brother's room, his dad comes and he's like, okay, you found what you were looking for, kicks him out of the room and closes the door. And then he kind of stares at him and he's like, why can't you have friends like Denny had? And then he goes off on how shitty these other three characters we're going to be following are. Mm-hmm. And that hits me so hard, because even that isn't good enough for your dad. Like, just who you hang out with isn't good enough, let alone you take into account he died like in the war. So he's like this exalted hero on top of that. And everything we see of the guy says he was like a fucking saint. So how could you live up to that anyway? So that's huge.
Often when, someone dies, we point out, how great they were, or they become almost mythological. I mean, if you've ever gone there's never been a funeral that I've been to, and probably anybody who's listening to, there's probably never been a funeral that any of us have gone to where someone talked shit about the person who was in the casket. No one's ever gone up and said, "Oh, this person was a philanderer," or "This person beat their kids," or whatever. They gambled or they
Challenge
drank
accepted.
themselves. There's okay, so there's never been this moment at funerals, typically where we sit there and we are honest and brutally honest about the person who died. And that partially has to deal with who we are and not wanting to spoil the occasion, or going ahead and letting that person live off as let the legend of that person live on. And that's what you see with Denny, because I'm sure there were some really unredeeming things about him. There were some things that his brother years later would think about. Oh yeah, Denny did this and he was a complete asshole to me. Yeah, because if you have brothers, that's typically the type of stuff that you remember. You remember the good stuff, but you also remember when your brothers were complete assholes to you, or you might have been one to them. So there's never this moment where, anybody you're related to, any family member you have, no matter how great they are, there's never this moment where you sit there and like, yeah, they were perfect. And, that's kind of what you see with Gordy, where he, for him, he doesn't want to sully, his brother's memory. So maybe it's an issue of he just wants to remember as a good guy. But all the good that he sees in Danny just makes him feel worse about who he is for some reason. But yeah, he only feels safe with his friends. He only feels welcomed with his friends. And with his dad basically saying, questioning his friends and seeing his friends as a bunch of degenerates, especially Chris, who's played by River Phoenix in the movie. There's just that concept of, these are the people who get me. You don't get them. So what does that say about our relationship? And as a young boy, you're always trying to get your dad's approval. It's just this weird thing that you don't want to disappoint your parents, but you especially don't want to disappoint your dad. I don't know if that has to deal with anything with, the concept of toxic masculinity, or this idea of who you're supposed to be as a man and not disappointing him in some way. But there are a lot of guys who have a lot of internalized shit going on because, they never got their father's approval.
Well, I almost wonder, like, for myself, I'm not going to totally generalize, although I think it's probably a very apt statement, generalized. But, my dad was not an emotional person, at least towards me, whereas my mom told me she loved me all the time. So I don't have to work for that as hard, So when you don't hear it from your dad, so then you have to have these accomplishments to get that same sort of thing. And I think that really plays into not necessarily even toxic masculinity, but just masculinity in general, where society has basically made it, oh, don't walk around saying I love you or else you're a pussy, And so I think that plays a huge part in it. That's what I wanted to say. Yeah.
And now on to the fear within this movie, because, there's so many things that are included. There's so many layers that you can get into, because basically the boys go out on this quest to go find this missing kid, think there was like a reward or something that was going to be offered. But
they just want to be famous.
Well, yeah, but just this idea that they're going to go and this is going to be their adventure. And they're not scared of any of that stuff. They're not scared about going into the woods and scared about camping out. It's basically, here's some cool shit for us to do and spend time with one another. And there's this one telling moment for me, among other ones, but there's one telling moment for me with Chopper the dog, where they have this legend about Chopper that, the junkyard man, he trained his dog to bite the balls of any boys that come around. And if you go through his yard and he sees you, he's going to sick the dog on you. And you have this great buildup. This dog is going to be Cujo. You're expecting just the big badass dog that's going to come after these kids as they take this, this shortcut. And as you're watching the movie, you're like, okay, they're climbing the fence, they're getting through the junkyard, they're doing all this stuff. Oh man, oh shit, here comes the dog. And you hear the junkyard man basically, yell out, Chopper, sick him. And then the narration that Gordy gives is, oh, he said Chopper sick him, but what I heard was Chopper sick balls. which when you're a kid, there's a lot of things that are going through your mind, and sometimes you invent stuff. But this whole thing where he's scared of what's going to happen, where this dog is going to, grab onto his groin, probably rip it off, and then go on about his day. The dog that shows up, it's almost like a joke. You're sitting there like, oh my, these kids were scared of this. And it's still, it's still a viciously trained dog. So, I mean, there are small dogs that could cause you some damage. But just the idea of it wasn't this big hulking mass of a dog. It was the way that a myth builds upon itself, gets even bigger. And then once you come face to face with the myth, you realize, holy shit, I've been sold on something that is completely untrue, completely just blown out of proportion, and I can't believe I believed this lie.
Shit, we could do a whole episode on that.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of...
What's interesting with that is I must have seen this for the first time around the same time that I saw The Sandlot, because in my head, if I play this scene out without having just watched it, it's always the dog from The Sandlot instead.
Yeah.
And so in a way, my younger brain has also created this myth that doesn't happen in the movie.
No, and I'm with you, because when I think about that chopper scene, I think about the hitting the baseball over the fence, and all the kids that were playing ball swore that the dog was basically as big as a bear. He swallowed the ball whole. But yeah, it's just the way that, as kids, it almost becomes like that old fisherman story, hey, I caught a fish, it was this big, but it got away. This is the same thing. All the fears that they have are at least in this sense, are exaggerated. Whether you're talking about Gordy's fear about, his family and how they receive him, with the dog, and even with bullies. Because there's, the Ace, who was played by Kiefer Sutherland. He's leader of this other little gang in town. They're supposed to be badasses.
The Cobras.
Yeah, they even have a cool name. They're going out there to find the missing kid's body, and once there is that confrontation, you see, even without the gun, I don't know if he would have, at least with Chris or Gordy, whoever had the gun. I don't even know if they hadn't had the gun, whether Ace would have, still kind of been all over their asses about not leaving. I mean, the gun helps, but you see how quickly he basically backs off, and you never really hear about him bothering them again, or at least Gordy's narration, Gordy in the future, never says anything about Ace bothering them again after that day.
So I want to back up with that for a minute. So the first time that you meet Ace, he's walking along and he grabs Gordy's hat off his head. And we have just had this flashback scene where Gordy's dead brother gave him the hat. So we know how important this is.
Mm-hmm.
Ace grabs it, doesn't even put it on his own head because he doesn't give a shit about this hat. He just likes tormenting people. And so he hands it to Eyeball and puts it on his head instead. What I didn't realize is that Gordy never gets the hat back. And when I was reading some stuff today, Rob Reiner in an old interview was talking about how in his head, it was so unimportant to Ace that he flipped the corner and threw it in the trash can. And Gordy never got it back. And so, but that scene establishes this dominance that's already happening. Mm-hmm. This thing that means the fucking world to Will Wheaton's character, Gordy, is taken away, and he won't even fight for that at this point. So at the end, when you get to the part where he's pulling a knife on Chris and holding it to his neck, and then Gordy fires the gun, like, that moment is so powerful because he didn't stand up to him earlier, and he's finally able to. I don't know if Gordy would have had the balls to do it without the gun. I think the gun is important in that way. Right. But I do think that if they had just actually stood up to Ace and not backed down, that Ace would have eventually backed off.
No, the gun is definitely important for Gordy because it gives him the courage to stand up. But all I was saying is, with what do they call, paper tigers or something? These guys that want to be tough guys. Once you call them on something, or once you stand up to them, they typically back down. Even if there's an audience, they'll find some kind of casual and cool way. Oh yeah, you know what? Since you got a pass because of your dead brother. I'll catch you kids in town, and you better watch out. Some kind of tough guy speech that he'll give, but still kind of get out of the situation. And I think Stephen King used a similar one in It, where the kids are getting bullied, and the town bully or whatever kind of gives that same thing. He's going to get in trouble, but he's like, oh yeah, if it weren't for your brother, I'd be kicking your ass right now. But I figured I'd take it easy on you. Sitting there, I was like, there's always this tough guy speech, but as soon as somebody stands up to him or somebody else in authority is around, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I'm not going to do anything to you.
Oh, you're so lucky. It has nothing to do with your abilities or anything else. You're just in the right place at the right time, man. Yeah. Another thing I just want to point out really fast, because it made me laugh this time and I've never noticed it before. So when Gordy's dad is talking about why can't you have friends like Denny's, right? He calls Chris a thief. And then Gordy immediately is like, he's not a thief. The next scene is Chris bringing the gun, and he's like, yeah, man, I took this from my dad and I swiped this. And then later he's like, oh yeah, man, I got these 4 Winstons that I stole from my dad. So I mean, obviously he is the thief who took the milk money or whatever it was and all that stuff. But I just think it's so.
But he took the money back.
Yep, we'll get to that, because that is such a powerful fucking scene. So another kid I want to talk about who has a crazy life is Teddy. Mm-hmm. Teddy is, I can't even say he's my favorite character. I was about to, but all 4 of them are literally my favorite characters in different ways. And that's one of the things I love so much about it. I think I identify with each of them in a different way. But Teddy and the whole story of how his dad held his ear to a stove, that's so nuts. And then Teddy's life is still defending his father all the time. It's my dad stormed the beaches of Normandy, and when the junkyard guy keeps calling him a loony and Teddy's losing his shit, number one, that's some of the best acting that Corey Feldman's ever had. So there's that. But it's amazing to me how Stephen King was able to give each of these kids so much stuff that applies to so many people. Like maybe your dad didn't hold your ear to the stove, but a lot of kids had that abuse at home of different types, whether it was severe like that or like Chris says that his dad hits him every now and then or whatever, but that's one of those things that we talk about, but we don't. Like we all know it happens, but we kind of try to, oh, that's not my business. I'm not in their household,
Right. That's how that's how he raises his kids, hey, he only hit his wife once.
Should be glad Teddy's dad isn't your dad. You got me instead.
You mentioned Teddy, but for me, I like Vern. Obviously I like the whole group dynamic, but Vern to me seems like the oddball of the group.
Yes. Because
I hate using the term normal, but he has the most normal home life. And then there's kind of this, this adventure wouldn't start if it weren't for him. He overhears his brother talking about, the missing kid. And then it's kind of like, hey, this is what we should go do so we can become heroes. And, the town will welcome us back in. And, almost everybody has their reason for doing it. Vern just wants to go and do it just to do it. Gordy wants to go because, I guess you could say he wants his father's approval by becoming a hero. Chris, so he isn't seen as delinquent. And you could even argue that Teddy's doing it so he can do something heroic like his father did, or at least what he imagines his father is doing. It's just Vern is kind of like, hey, my friends want to go do this. Let's go do this. Let's go have some fun. Let's go on an adventure. Because there's several times, at least during their trip, that Vern it's so obvious that he couldn't give a shit if they find the body or not. He's hanging out with his friends.
Well, I almost even wonder if he really wanted to go. I think he was just like, hey guys, I got this great thing to tell you. And then he's like, what? We're doing what? Fuck. No, why?
But he's looking forward to the s'mores. He's looking forward to, the ghost stories or just the stories themselves. Because, when Gordy tells that story about, Lardes, they're all just enjoying themselves. And it's like Vern is sitting there and enjoying himself even more than everybody else because he gets to hang out with his friends. It's not an issue of he's got kicked out of his house or he's got to worry about somebody's approval or there's a certain label attached to him. It's like, these are my friends. I'm going to go hang out with them.
His mom cleans his room for him. I mean, he's got a good life going on other than that. The fact she chucked away his treasure map.
But hey, when you're that age, treasure maps are very important.
He needs his pennies.
But yeah, for him, it's for Vern, it's an adventure. It's about fun. I think for him, and it's that thing that we kind of all realize, but we realize it when it's too late, and maybe he realized it at the time. They're not gonna have times like that for too much longer. And Chris makes that comment to Gordy, saying that, oh, when we go to school next year, we're not going to all be in the same classes. You know, you're going to be here. You're going to be in these advanced classes, and we'll be basically in the dummy classes. We'll be in the regular classes where you'll be out doing great stuff. And that sad thing that none of us realized at the time, that at one point you stop hanging out with your friends. Like there's this one point where all the friends that you're hanging out with, and let's just say this group of 4 guys, there's eventually one time that's the last time that all of you are together. And I think as an audience member watching that scares you because you realize you have the same thing and you're watching these kids go through it and they don't know what's going to happen. Except basically Chris has an idea because he's at that moment where he as a teenager going into young adulthood, he realizes we don't have much time. And especially, with seeking out this dead kid, they realize it could end at any moment, not necessarily because of a new class or a new school year, but because something bad can happen to you. And especially with Gordy and Vern on the train tracks, that idea that they came very close to getting killed by the train.
Well, and you even back up before that, Teddy plays train dodge the first time that the train comes through. And Teddy's like standing there like, come on, and Chris has to go up there and literally pick him up and move him out of the way. And this is the way that the kid they're going to find died. And they're pretty sure they know that at this point. Mm-hmm. And Teddy still does it because Teddy's crazy, but also because when you're 13, you're fucking insane. Like, we were all crazy. Like, we all did stuff like that. I don't know if you did that exact thing, but
I'm not telling on myself on the podcast.
I did. I don't care. My mom doesn't listen to the podcast. I can tell you. But but no, so I find it so fascinating that first you have Teddy doing it, which is fear for everyone else watching it, especially Chris as he's trying to move him and can't at first. But then you have the big scene that everybody knows, of course, where Vern's crawling across the tracks and Gordy's behind him yelling, "Move, get up, stand up," And then you get the fear that they're having running, but also the fear that Chris has watching it. Chris is like, is my friend going to die? And that fear was so strong.
Remind me, what was Teddy's reaction when Vern and Gordy made it off the train tracks?
Teddy looks scared shitless. Okay, because they kind of they jump off the side. Like, they don't make it all the way. They jump into the rocks down below. But Teddy looks scared shitless, and then Chris walks over, and he's just like, hey, now we know what time the next train's coming through. Because, it's his job to make a joke, and everybody's safe, it's okay. But Teddy still looks kind of scared, so it's funny that you mentioned that, because I hadn't really thought about it till right now. Well, I think Teddy also doesn't give a shit about himself. I think he cares about the others.
No, and you're right. I mean, that's what it comes down for him is, he's self-destructive, does not have a good home life, so there's all types of trauma that he's probably dealing with. And for him, it's taking care of his friends, looking out for him, being a protector, kind of like Chris is, but a little bit more unhinged, I guess, as far as his approach in caring about his friends. Vern, Teddy.
So we reach this point where Chris is trying to show Gordy that he matters. And Gordy's whole thing is that he didn't play football like Denny, and he doesn't have good friends like Denny, and his dad and mom don't love him like Denny. And Chris basically forces Gordy to tell everybody a story because Gordy's a writer and he loves his stories. So we get the lard-ass scene. Hey, Don, have you ever watched it on cable TV with the words edited?
It's funny that you say that.
I know. Isn't it amazing that I came up with this question all on my own?
One of my big gripes is when you censor stuff that really doesn't need to be censored. But yeah, I don't think that lard ass is something that needs to be censored when it's part of the story, especially if it's on, I don't know, basic cable, whether it's in the daytime or not. Because, I mean, but again, this was 10, 15 years ago. So, the standards and practices have changed since then. But
They probably still do it.
I'm sure at least on one of these channels that they'll show it on, they'll silence out the second part of the name. So all you'll hear is lard, and it goes like that. But yeah, the story about lard ass for me, any kid who's been bullied and you watch that scene where what's his name, David, who's nicknamed lard ass because of his weight, and he affectionately kind of accepts that that's his name because he's such a big guy. Anybody who's been bullied over their weight, when you see the lard ass story, that's almost your favorite part of this, because all these people are sitting there cheering him on, as part of this pie eating contest. But they're cheering him on more as a way to kind of make fun of him because, hey, it's the big fat guy, so of course he's going to win the pie eating contest. But his plan is, I'm going to make everybody at this thing throw up. So I think he took something before the contest to unsettle his stomach. So he starts
Castor oil.
Yeah, starts eating the pies as part of the contest, and people are sitting there like, "Oh man, look at him go! Lardass is doing it!" And they eventually start breaking out in this chant as if he's about to score a touchdown or do something remarkable with a sporting event. But it's almost
he's going to do something remarkable.
Oh yeah, it's definitely going to be memorable. It's going to stick in your memory because when Lardass starts getting sick, there's this big buildup, and if you've never seen the movie, you almost know what's going to happen. I mean, it's very predictable as far as what's going to happen, but you're still not expecting everything to go down the way it does. So Lardass gets sick, he throws up, and it creates this chain reaction of vomit, this projectile vomiting all throughout this area, where everyone's throwing up on themselves and everyone else, and he just sits there just smiling with the biggest grin he possibly could have, because all these people threw up all over each other, and it's because of him. And he's loving every minute of it because he couldn't get back at them on at a different level. He had to do something public to shame and embarrass them, and almost make them feel the same way that they had made him feel for all these years for talking about his weight.
You know what else I love about that scene?
What's that?
I love directly following that scene because there's such a little joke that Stephen King makes about being a writer. So Gordy's like, it was a complete and total barf-o-rama. And then he's sitting there like, yeah, story done. And then Teddy's like, so what happened next? Well, that's the end?
Yeah.
Why is that the end? That sucks. And then he tries to write a different ending for Gordy. And I love that so much because I'm like, King probably giggled his ass off writing that part.
Yeah, because it's never enough. As far as, we talked about bullying earlier with Ace, and of course there's bullying with Lardass, David Hogan. I would venture to bet that anybody who's gone through some type of bullying has had a moment where they thought, oh, I wish I could embarrass this person. Somebody who's been pantsed. They think about, I got to think about embarrassing the jock who pulled my pants down, or find out, the teacher's full name, especially if you had a teacher who was a little bit rude to you or something like that. You wanted to find some information on somebody that was going to embarrass them. And, nicknames, what they're afraid of is always a good one.
Well, and even when the junkyard guy is calling Teddy's dad a loony, I really like how it shows that never ends.
Right.
But it also makes such a juxtaposition because the boys are constantly calling each other names or putting each other down or just doing what everybody does, I won't even say it's just what boys do because I see girls do it all the time.
That's what friends do.
But like just that playful banter where you knock each other down. But if anybody else does it, then you all have to gang up and beat the shit out of them, you know? So, but I love how it shows that it never ends because this adult is willing to do it to kids. That also actually plays into another big part of the fear because the junkyard guy does that to Teddy with his fears. And when Gordy goes to buy food, the grocery store guy accidentally plays into his fears by talking about Denny and how good Denny was at football and Denny this, Denny that. You know, Gordy's dad insults Chris. So, like, it's always these things that you fear, but every one of their fears is so common knowledge in this little town, and they're constantly dealing with it. And that just sucks. If that's not horror, I don't know what the fuck is.
I think probably the scariest thing is everyday life, in all honesty. I mean, because a lot of the stuff that we see in horror is so kind of out there that, at least for you and me, that stuff is comedy. But stuff like this where it's, I can never escape, you know, the legacy of my brother. And I'm 12. So, you know, you gotta add that onto it as well. But I cannot escape who this guy was. I can't, you know, he's died, but he's not at rest because everyone keeps bringing him back up, bringing everything about him back up to where I have to relive, you know, all the glory that he has. And it's one of those things where the pain is going to continue. I mean, no matter how much he loved his brother, because it's obvious that he loved his brother, but the issue is you almost have this sense that he hates the myth that's been built around his brother, because it keeps getting thrown in his face of how great his brother was. And, you know, if someone's going on and telling you about how great someone else is, you know, whether they admit to it or not, they're basically telling you how great you aren't. Oh yeah, your brother was this. And what are you saying about me at that point? Because you're not having that conversation about me, you know, Gordy, you're not having that conversation about me. You're having this conversation about my brother and then talking to me about him again and bringing it back up and up and up.
Well, and it also plays into Gordy's fear that there's something wrong with him.
Right.
Everybody keeps ignoring him. He says he's the invisible child. And then he's told that his friends aren't good enough. And then we have this incident where this guy tells him how great Denny is. And he's constantly being told, like you said, you're not good enough, whether they're directly saying it or not. When he has the dream, they directly say it. But for the most part, it's not direct. And he even goes to Chris and he's like, am I weird? And Chris is like, yeah. And he's like, no, seriously, am I weird? And Chris realizes he's very serious and he goes, yeah, but everybody is. And I think that Gordy needed that so much. Like, he needed to know there's not necessarily something wrong with you. There's something wrong with everybody. and there was something wrong with Denny, even if nobody sees it right now.
Yeah, they're still locked in that memory to where he's infallible. But yeah, I mean, and you know what's great is Chris almost seems as though he's supposed to be the adult with all of them, because, you know, he's obviously his wisdom is beyond everyone else's in at least being able to offer that type of advice or that type of commentary, because there are so many of us who needed to hear that growing up. Like, everybody's fucked up, everybody's weird, but not in a way to kind of downplay whatever your issues are, but to remind you, you're not alone in this. You know, okay, yeah, you got a goofy haircut, or you have a funny accent, or you look different than everybody else, you know, skin color or gender identity, you know, just these issues of everybody else out there has their own stuff. You've got stuff going on with you as well. So don't feel like something is wrong with you because you don't fit into whatever else somebody else's definition of X. You're going to eventually get to that point where you meet more people that fit your definition of who you are, or at least match up with the definition of who you are and who you identify with. Or they don't give a shit enough to judge you by that.
So I'm also really fascinated by Chris himself and his constant need to protect others because he feels he hasn't been protected. Mm-hmm. So you have he brings the gun because he knows they'll need it at some point. He just doesn't know what
Right.
for, or that they could need it, rather. He pulls Teddy off the tracks. He goes and makes sure that he's the one that goes and looks over the edge in case something has happened to his friends. He doesn't let Teddy go when the others jump off the track. He's constantly the first to protect everybody. He's the one who wants to stay up at night when the coyotes are going crazy and hold the gun and make sure everybody's safe. And of course, that's what leads to him dying at the end of the film, is him having to stop others from bad things happening to them. But the part where River Phoenix hits what I consider the best acting in the entire movie is when he's talking about stealing the lunch money, or the milk money, And he's like, yeah, I stole it. You know, I stole it. But what if maybe I tried to give it back? And maybe, I don't remember her name, but the teacher like took the money and then it never got where it was supposed to be. And we still all got to blame the Chambers kid while she got this brand new skirt. And he breaks down crying, and he doesn't even finish the sentence, but he's like, I never thought a teacher would do that. And like, that ripped me up today. Like, because that can mean so many things in today's world, you know? But it goes back to that never feeling safe anywhere. And so that, in a way, kills him at the end, because that reinforces so much in him that he always has to protect people to make sure somebody else can be protected. And that's why he dies at the end. And that shit is just killing me today. So we get to the other part everybody knows. So if you talk to people about this movie, there's 3 scenes they absolutely know. They know the train, they know the barf-o-rama, and they know the leeches in Wheaton's underwear. I was reading about the background of making this, and they actually made the little pond, or whatever you want to call it, so that they would know what was actually in it. But then River Phoenix, in a obviously very old interview, was laughing about they built this pond and then we didn't use it for 3 months. So by the time we got in it, they didn't actually know what was in it anymore. But so the little slugs are fake slugs, obviously, but they still gross me out. And these are special effects, graphics, props, whatever you want to call them, from fucking 1986, and they're still gross today because I just watched it today. And but that scene has always terrified me. I don't really like getting in the water as it is. I prefer a chlorinated pool where I can see to the bottom. I do not like rivers or creeks or anything else. And I think that this scene plays a part in that, because when they get out and they have the leeches on their necks and their chests and their backs and their legs and they're peeling them all off, grosses me the hell out. But then you have that moment where Wheaton pulls his underwear forward and loses his fucking mind. And I don't know about you, but growing up in Nebraska, we have a lot of weird little animals like that. And that part just messes with me even today.
Yeah, and for me, I didn't know when I first saw this. I didn't know what the hell a leech was. So when I'm watching it, I'm not seeing it as anything that's too scary because I'd never been exposed to one. I just figured it was, it was like a worm or whatever. And when it was brought to my attention that these things latch onto your body and they suck blood and all this other stuff, and I think I saw this before, I was a teenager, so I wasn't putting all these pieces together. But just the idea when you get older and then you see that scene and you're thinking to yourself like, oh my God, this thing, was either on his penis or on his testicles or whatever. And just kind of the cringe factor that's there.
Well, and fear of anything happening to your penis. Yeah. That's huge with every guy.
And just the idea, I did not want to be anywhere near water where something like that would be.
All right, let's go to the part that Don wants to talk about the most.
Dead body, dead
go
body,
ahead.
Dead body.
Oh, no, we have to edit it. Body.
Oh. That's
body. Right. Body. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, but the whole idea, as far as their adventure, is to go and find, oh God, I forgot the kid's name. They were going to find the dead body of
Roy Bauer.
Okay. This whole adventure is about going to find this dead kid's body, and there's never a point that these guys start to look at it and say, hey man, we're going to see a dead body, are you ready to deal with that, outside of a funeral, until they come across the body, and then it really hits them how mangled this kid is and how he had life and how that life has been extinguished. And also, what had taken place in that kid's life, the future that he's going to miss out on because he's been killed. And it's one of those things that when you see death take place or you see the result that leads to someone's death, it makes you think about your own mortality. It makes you think about the stuff that you have done, the stuff that you haven't done, the stuff you wish you hadn't done. And that whole scene, aside from fighting with the cobras over the body, it's about that realization of death and, the finality of life and where exactly you can go after that. And, all those unanswered questions. And these are 12-year-old boys that are coming across this body. The only other movie where I recall a scene like that would have been in Boys in the Hood, where the kids, his mom is like, hey, you want to go see a dead body? They go find this guy who had been murdered. They see the body, and it's kind of like, holy shit, our innocence is gone now because we've seen this. But then at least in their case, it was so nonchalant, you realize that their innocence had been gone long before. But for these kids in this movie, their innocence is gone from, one, this adventure, but then two, it's solidified once they see that dead body, because now it's, one, the adventure's over, but then two, I have to come to the realization that somebody is actually dead at the end of this journey.
So then we come to the almighty scene where Ace and his crew show up and they get the whole fight going on, where at first the kids are like, there's 4 of us, what are you gonna do? And then Ace is like, there's 8 of us, and so what I find very powerful about that scene is what we've been talking about with family and not fitting in there. When Ace walks up and pops his knife against Chris's neck, whether he's really going to cut him or not, or if he's just trying to terrify the shit out of him, which is what I think is happening, Chris's brother is standing right there. And he's kind of like, Ace, like, let's not do that, man. He doesn't jump forward, doesn't save his brother, doesn't stand up to Ace. And I think that is so small that you can almost miss it, but it's so powerful because it could mean many things. It could be he knows Ace isn't going to actually do it, or it could be I can't even stand up to Ace in this situation. And so to me, that's also, that's his group. Like, it's the same thing for him that Gordy's group is for them. It's that camaraderie and the place where you fit in. But then he's also like, that's my brother. Like, what do I do? And then we get Gordy popping up the gun. Ace's plan goes to hell. Gordy has the gun pointed at him. And he hits my favorite line in the entire movie, where Ace says, what are you going to do, LeChance? Shoot us all? And Gordy stares him down and says, no, Ace, just you. And that line is Gordy coming into his own. That's where he grows the fuck up. That's where he's able to be the hero. That's everything. That moment is so powerful. And maybe it's the gun giving him the confidence, but I think it's also the journey that got him there that gives him that confidence. And I love that somebody protected Chris.
Yeah, after he'd spent all his time and then continues to spend his time protecting other people. But yeah,
meanwhile, Teddy runs away.
But yeah, it's definitely that moment that Gordy grows up and becomes, I hate to say live up to the legend of his brother, but it's almost one of those things of all I guess all the ways in which people told him about how great his brother was, how great Denny was. It stuck with him so much. It was almost as if he had to prove to people how good he was. So in 2 ways, he proves that. One, by saying, nobody's taking this body. We're not taking it. You're not taking it. And then 2, by saving his friend and definitely standing up in a way that lets Ace know that he's for real, which is, I'm only going to kill you. I'm only going to shoot you. Like, I don't need to shoot anybody else. You're the one who's a problem. And, going back to when Ace took his hat, that whole aspect of, this isn't about the hat, but it's not about the hat either.
Well, and the other thing I like is it's the first time that you see Ace scared. Mm-hmm. Like, he might not be completely convinced Gordy's going to shoot him, but he doesn't know.
Right.
So he's scared there. And then he has to turn and walk back up that hill to where his car and all of his friends are waiting. And even though you see his back, you don't get any emotions from him, that sort of thing. But he's scared shitless to go face the Cobras right now because he just got fucking knocked off his pedestal by a 12-year-old.
Yeah, gun or no gun. And at least in that sense, I'm sure he could make an argument like, what do you guys want me to do? He had a gun. But
he had a gun.
There's still going to be that question of like, I'm sure he's going to probably take a lot of shit when he goes back to his friends, or at least when they get back. Some of them will be toadies and jump in and say, yeah, man, it's cool. It's like, we'll get him later. But there may have been an instance where, Chris's brother's like, yeah, you tried to kill my fucking brother, dude. Yeah, and right. We need to talk about this. But yeah, and even at least in the end of the film, or the epilogue of the film, where Richard Dreyfuss is Gordy all grown up, it gives you another outlook, at least with fear, and that's with respect to fatherhood. And this wasn't something I thought about at the time, but it was definitely something I thought about when rethinking about this film. Because he's a dad, he's working on his project, he's writing this story. His kid wants to go play, go out of the house and do whatever they're going to do. But that idea of you don't want to make the same mistakes your parents made. And that's the scariest thing about being a parent that people will not mention. You are so scared you're going to become your parents. As far as having the bad qualities of your parents. That you.
Oh, yeah. We're never scared that we'll do the great thing they did.
It's I better not say this because then my kid's going to be fucked up this way. Or I better not say this or my kid's going to be fucked up that way. Or,
Or, holy shit, I can't believe I said that. And what have I done?
Exactly. And it's always second guessing yourself. It's always questioning exactly what it is that's going to get your kid to come out as much as I hate to say this, as normal as possible. To where they don't carry those emotional scars or carry that emotional baggage around with them that many of us have carried because we didn't have somebody who told us how to behave in a bullying situation. Or we didn't have somebody who told us, hey, here's how you really talk to a girl. You just have to deal with the failure of trying to talk to a girl and then, go about your life. Or, just all those different things about you don't have to fit. My favorite piece of advice was from one of the House Party movies. Bernie Mac talking to Chris Reed, kid. And he basically tells him, like, hey, if people don't like who you are, fuck them. You don't have any use for them. And so, every time I see that quote come up or see that video clip come up, I think to myself, like, how much I wish I had that same piece of advice. Because so many of us spent so much time trying to fit in, whether we realize it or not, or even if we were trying to not fit in, there were still, parts of us that wanted to be accepted in some way. Yeah,
but we wouldn't listen to it anyway.
And that's fair, but there's so much social pressure that kids are under. And it doesn't matter which generation you're talking about. We're talking about boomers, whether we're talking about Gen X, Y, Z, the iGen, millennials, whoever we're talking about. There's still that piece where I have to do this, whether we're talking about, consumer capitalism, political parties, Facebook groups, Twitter, any of that, even conventions. You still have these cliques and these niche groups that you try to fit into. And, we just all need to realize if I'm not welcome in that group, I don't fucking need that group. As opposed to, I need this group because it'll validate who I am as a person, as a professional, as a scholar, as a student, as, a doctor or whoever it is, as opposed to my work will speak for itself.
All right, so really fast, let's talk about the very end.
Okay.
Because I think the very end is so incredibly powerful. So, of course, the movie opens with him with the newspaper nearby, and it says that Chris Chambers was stabbed in a restaurant trying to break up a fight. And we don't know who Chris Chambers is at that point, obviously. But at the end, he starts talking about what happened to each of them. And he says that Vern went on to get married, have 4 kids, and he drives a forklift somewhere. I don't remember where. And Teddy he floundered around and did odd jobs and that whole thing. And then Chris, of course, did the college courses with Gordy and made something of himself and became an attorney. And then the tragedy happens where he walks into a fast food place and gets stabbed to death. I don't know if you've ever read the story The Body, which is what this is based on, but the end of The Body is worse. The end of The Body, Chris is the 3rd one to die. It still takes place the same way. So Vern is killed in a house fire after a party in 1966. Teddy, under the influence of alcohol and drugs, crashes his car in 1972, killing himself and his passengers. And then Chris gets stabbed in the neck. So all of them didn't make it out. That's just Gordy, and his looking back, he has the whole how he survived and they didn't. So he actually has even more guilt. But the thing that I noticed that I had never thought about until you were talking a little bit ago, where you brought up that he never mentions Ace again. In the book, he mentions Ace. He goes back to Castle Rock and he sees Ace. What's so powerful about that is it's not a confrontation and it's not a, dude, I'm so sorry, I was such an asshole. It's just there. He just sees him. But what Gordy gets out of that is that he made it out of Castle Rock and that's his past and it's behind him. And I really kind of wish... I don't need the others to die and all that shit, but I really kind of wish that scene with Ace was still there, because I think that's pretty powerful as well, but it's still good the way it is.
It's powerful, at least for us, those of us who've gotten out of our, I like to say that I don't have a hometown, because I don't. I was military family, and I stayed in Georgia for a while, went to high school there, and this is nothing against anybody who doesn't get out of their towns, but there's a different outlook that you have if you leave where you're from or where you spent a lot of time, especially if it's, where you went to junior high and high school. You leave that area and you stay gone, and then you come back to visit, you might have family or whatever, and you'll be surprised at how many people are still there and still, have a completely different outlook on the world than you do. Not necessarily, politically or whatever, but when you travel, when you've lived in different parts of the country, if you've had, different types of jobs, you've been exposed to different types of people, you have that new outlook on, what's there. And for me, I don't care to ever go to a high school reunion, ever. I don't plan on ever going to one. And if offered, I probably still wouldn't go. And that's nothing saying that I'm too good for it. It's just kind of like with Gordy, that's in the past. Like, I have no desire to revisit the past. I'm not one of these people who looks forward to high school reunion. I never will. Because for me, high school was not the best part of my life. And it definitely makes me appreciate, it makes me want to make sure that for, the next generation that's coming up, my nieces, nephews, my daughter, that I give them that guidance to where, I felt that I needed that guidance during that time period, because I didn't have that network of friends or a group of friends where I could have gone and, we could have gone out in the woods and bullshitted for a couple of days. But it's important to have those outlets. And what you see in this film is they have that outlet to deal with all those external factors, whether it's, a horrible home environment, death of a brother, bullying, this lack of acceptance, abuse, all that type of stuff. They have each other, but at least for Gordy, story Gordy, he doesn't have those friends anymore. He doesn't have anybody he can connect with after the 60s. Movie Gordy, the person who had the biggest impact on him, is gone. So it's one of those things of, when you're at that age as a teenager, you don't realize at the time that eventually you and your friends are going to go your separate ways. But as you get older and you have friends who pass, or you have friends that, get locked up or get, shipped overseas, the military, and you never see them again, and you do get some word about where they are in their life, whether they're doing great or something bad, something misfortune has happened to them, you realize all the time that you lost. And I think that's probably the scariest thing about this film, is when you put it in the context of real life. The scariest shit is realizing how much time you lost between, yourself and people that you were close to, and realizing you're not getting that time back.
So speaking of friends that we lose too early, like I said at the very beginning, my friend Preston Carnes recently passed away. He'd been waiting for a heart transplant his entire life that never came, and he was still able to donate his own organs. Guys, I highly, highly beg you to sign up to be organ donors if you're not already. Just go to organdonor.gov. You're not going to fucking need them when you're dead. Give them to somebody who does. Just do it. Help somebody. Chris Chambers wouldn't want it any other way. All right, so that wraps up this episode of the Necronama.com. We'll be back next week on time, unlike this week. I don't know what we're talking about yet, so you don't get to know. But I'm still James Sabata.
And I'm Don Guillory.
And we hope that you will join us then.